Show, don't tell. If there's a story to be told about a specific user and a specific problem, start with that. What is it about that problem? What is it about those people that require your solution? And how have you actually solved it for them? If you've actually created something real, make sure you mention that. If you actually have users using it in real life, make sure you mention that. And especially number 3, users using it in real life. If you've actually created something real, make sure you mention that. If you actually have used it for them. If you've actually created something real, make sure you mention that. If you actually have users using it in real life, make sure you mention that. And especially number 3, if someone is actually paying for it, definitely mention that. Y Combinator will receive applications from every part of the spectrum, from the earliest stage when people literally just quit their jobs or haven't even quit their jobs yet, and maybe they're talking through an idea, all the way down to companies that are already doing revenue, already making even $1 million or $2 million a year in revenue. That's a wide range. The most important thing for you is to establish where you are on that stack, and if you're farther along, great. One of the things that you want to make sure people understand is how large this market opportunity actually is. Is there a way you can show that your business or your problem set that you're trying to solve can be worth $1 billion or more? And in sort of real terms, what that means is in the next 5 to 10 years, is there some real way for you to get to $100 million a year in revenue? I know that's a really high bar, but that is what venture investors are looking for when they make an investment. Y Combinator is looking for successful startups that can grow very quickly. It's important for you to be able to show that the problem you're trying to solve and the solution that you've created can result in something that can truly be massive. And that's why the story matters. If you have real customers, say so. If you have stories about why those customers choose you over all your competitors, say so. If you have some sort of special sauce, if you have something that nobody else has truly figured out, definitely say so. Point number 2, don't use buzzwords. Plain English is best because Y Combinator uses plain English to figure out whether or not you know your stuff. Everywhere else in the world, people use special in-word buzzwords to determine whether or not you're a part of the in crowd or the out crowd, and they will invest based on that. Great investors don't use buzzwords to figure out who to invest in. They use their brains. Great investors try to understand what you're saying, and then they make their own mind up. That's how we try to do investment at Initialized, and that's how Y Combinator decides who to let in. Don't use buzzwords to show that you are a part of the in crowd. Use plain English to actually communicate what is actually happening with your startup. Talk to me about the problem, talk to me about the solution, and tell me why you are different. Why is it that your solution will beat all others? And it's not going to come from saying words like hyper-verticalization or unbundling or any sort of term like that. I don't need to know that you went to the right parties or can use the right terms. I want to know, do you have something unique? Are you looking at the world in the right way? One of the things I realized while investing in so many companies is that the best way to actually figure out if someone has anything is actually look at it from plain English. If I sit down with someone and just have a conversation about what they're doing, do I get excited about what they're doing? And do I believe that this But this is advice that's broadly useful for any pitch situation. A great pitch is not something incredibly complicated that impresses the listener. A great pitch is actually very simple, understandable statements put side by side from one another. That, when you zoom out, you realize that is a really big idea. Finally, I'm pretty convinced that everything I ever needed to know in startups, I basically learned in high school newspaper. How you should be writing is actually an inverted pyramid. When you write, there's a beginning, middle, and an end. Normally, throughout our school days, we're taught to have a topic, sentence, exposition, and then conclusion. When you write for YC, but when you write for all things having to do with your startup, you should actually use the inverted pyramid. Instead of saying the conclusion at the end, figure out what that conclusion is and put it right at the beginning. Right after that, start adding proof. That way, when someone actually hears it or when they read it on your homepage, they can decide very quickly whether or not what you say makes sense. Right after it enters their brain, there's a bunch of proof that makes it more and more real. When you invert the conclusion and the exposition, you get exactly what you want. It's using your reader's time effectively. So that's it. 3 really easy things you can do to make your YC application better. Thanks so much for watching, and I do actually have a giveaway this time. My giveaway is actually my time and my advice, especially because do I get excited? You don't need to know that you went to the right parties or can use the right terms. I want to know, do you have something unique? Are you looking at the world in the right way? One of the things I realized while investing in so many companies is that the best way to actually figure out if someone has anything is actually look at it from plain English. If I sit down with someone and just have a conversation about what they're doing, do I get excited about what they're doing? And do I believe that this needs to be manifest in the world? That is what you're trying to get across in your YC application. But this is advice that's broadly useful for any pitch situation. A great pitch is not something incredibly complicated that impresses the listener. A great pitch is actually very simple, understandable statements put side by side from one another. That, when you zoom out, you realize that is a really big idea. Finally, I'm pretty convinced that everything I ever needed to know in startups, I basically learned in high school newspaper. How you should be writing is actually an inverted pyramid. When you write, there's a beginning, middle, and an end. Normally, throughout our school days, we're taught to have a topic, sentence, exposition, and then conclusion. When you write for YC, but when you write for all things having to do with your startup, you should actually use the inverted pyramid. Instead of saying the conclusion at the end, figure out what that conclusion is and put it right at the beginning. Right after that,
Hello
start
everyone,
adding proof.
my name is Chia, nice to meet you.
When someone actually hears it or when they read it on your homepage, they can decide very quickly whether or not what you say makes sense. Right after it enters their brain, there's a bunch of proof that makes it more and more real. When you invert the conclusion and the exposition, you get exactly what you want. It's using your reader's time effectively. So that's it. 3 really easy things you can do to make your YC application better. Thanks so much for watching, and I do actually have a giveaway this time. My giveaway is use the inverted pyramid. Instead of saying the conclusion at the end, figure out what that conclusion is and put it right at the beginning. Right after that, start adding proof. That way, when someone actually hears it or when they read it on your homepage, they can decide very quickly whether or not what you say makes sense. Right after it enters their brain, there's a bunch of proof that makes it more and more real. When you invert the conclusion and the exposition, you get exactly what you want. It's using your reader's time effectively. So that's it. Three really easy things you can do to make your YC application better. Thanks so much for watching, and I do actually have a giveaway this time. My giveaway is actually my time and my advice, especially because if you watch this, you probably have YC applications coming up. Please go to this link down here, bit.ly/GaryTan-YC-help. That's bit.ly/GaryTan-YC-help. What you'll find there is a Google form. Put in a Google Doc of your YC application, and I will comment on it. I've worked with YC companies for years, and I'm happy to be a resource to you. Thank you for subscribing. Click the bell to get a notification, and thank you for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you later. Thanks. You can choose to have a normal life, or you can choose something totally different. I'm here to say that if you're watching this, you might be able to choose to put a dent in the universe. And Steve Jobs pointed the way back in 1994.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much. Try to have a nice family life. Have fun. Save a little money. But life, and that's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. The minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually no smarter than you, the minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side. You can change it and mold it. That's maybe the most important thing.
As Steve said, the moment you realize the world can be influenced by your actions, everything changes. But how does that change get transferred from you to others? Usually the best ideas start as little known ones until a group of really passionate, hardworking believers turn them into a movement, a social movement. And then one day, seemingly overnight, it's everywhere. How does it become that way? I've really been lucky to see it firsthand. I've funded hundreds of companies right when they were just a few people starting out. Now more than a dozen of them are worth more than $1 billion. And every single one of them started as a movement. It's a team and a direction and a thing that helps millions and possibly billions of people. Today, we're going to talk about how a movement is born and what you can do to build that movement. Let's get into it. That was one of the first songs played by the Ramones at CBGB in New York City in 1974. A lot of people consider them to be one of the best bands in history. This was a historic moment for punk rock, and the music played in this one music hall in New York City is now a part of our Western collective consciousness. You might not have ever heard that song, but you've heard the echoes of it in rock songs for decades now. So a musician might create a new sound that becomes an yet informal social entities that are engaged in extra-institutional conflict that is oriented towards a goal. What is extra-institutional conflict? Conflict is actually fundamentally born of a particular problem, and the goal is to solve that problem. Do you ever wonder why we call computers personal computers? Well, at that time, in the 1970s, personal computers were a crazy idea. At the time, only large businesses and universities and governments had access to them, and this was the conflict. The powers that be didn't even think normal people would ever want it. This is what the dawn of the personal computer revolution looked like.
Clubs of enthusiasts grew up all over America, like the Homebrew Computer Club in San Francisco, where members showed off what their homebrew computers could do. From these modest beginnings came a series of startup companies selling parts for the Altair, and soon whole computers. By 1976, there were enough of them to hold a convention in Atlantic City.
565 บาท
Off in a corner of the convention hall were a group of raggedy-looking guys selling circuit boards. Two of them would become synonymous with a personal computer: Steve Jobs and Stephen Wozniak. As teenagers growing up in Silicon Valley, Jobs and Wozniak had developed reputations as high-tech pranksters, all too eager to snub their noses at authority.
Woz and I had known each other since I was about 12 or 13 years old. And our first project together was we built these little boxes to make free telephone calls. So when it came to building a computer together, Woz was the brilliant hardware engineer and focused on the core design of the computer. And I was worrying about which parts we ought to use and how we were going to build these things and how sort of somebody that wasn't a Woz was going to manage to buy all the extra parts you still needed to buy and plug this thing together.
So I was not designing a computer with any idea we'd ever start a company, ever have a product, ever be successful. It was just to go down to the club and show off and to all it used. Steve saw the interest, and he started coming up with ideas right away how this thing could be turned into a product, how it could be marketed.
And that movement ended up turning into computers on every desk, in every home, and yes, now the one in your hand and in your pocket that you're using. Watch this right now. And that's how it all starts. First, as a fringe movement almost 50 years ago. Now, society has changed completely. And that's the lesson. Sometimes if you really believe in something, you've got to do it yourself. The first stage to any movement is this exactly: emergence or social ferment. What do you want that nobody else cares about yet? What problem do you see first? Try to solve it for yourself. Then you might find that a lot of other people need it too. If you find that a lot of other people need what you're creating, that's when you'll find people start following you. One of my favorite authors, Derek Sivers, actually talks exactly about this in his TED Talk. That is what it takes to create a movement from scratch. Leadership isn't enough. It's about the followers too.
First, of course, you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. He has to
Sunflower
first
Pepsi.
follow with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, three is a crowd, and the crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come two more people, and immediately after, three more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to.
You could be the first leader or the first follower. But either way, you've got to have intrinsic motivation, really wanting it from the bottom of your heart, not because someone else told you to. You're going to need people to champion your idea or your company, not someone else. If Steve Jobs looked to Hewlett Packard for a playbook, he never would have started Apple. If Brian Armstrong looked to big finance for approval, he never would have started Coinbase. If the Velvet Underground just copied whatever was mainstream at the time, the rock and roll greats like the Ramones and Nirvana would never have emerged. To be first, you have to really want it. You can't ask for permission. And this is where we've got to return to punk rock. We've got to talk about DIY, do it yourself. It's a way of doing things that doesn't require any permission from anyone else. Some people who don't like punk like to say, it sucks, it's too simple. But to me, the detractors miss the point. This is real, this is authentic, and most importantly, it's unapologetic. It's not trying to be something other than what it already is. Truly embodied right now. Don't wait for someone to tell you something. Nobody has to come and bless you with anything. You just pick up a guitar and you do it. You pick up a keyboard and you start writing code.
Nothing against Led Zeppelin. I have all those records, but there's nothing on the record that makes me really connect with anyone in the band because they live on another planet. You're never going to pick up Robert Plant. You're never going to walk into the venue and walk up, hey, excuse me, Bob. But at a punk rock show, you could watch the band load in and say, you need some help? And all of a sudden, you're Bad Brains roadie. This could happen to me.
The realness about that is really what makes it connect. And when you're early and alone, that's more important than anything else. If you watch my interview with Coinbase founder Brian Armstrong, that's exactly what he did when he was building the first versions of that website. He begged, borrowed, and stole the skills necessary to get a website up. He didn't look for a designer. He used the free open source Clear Bootstrap library. And it worked great. You don't need the absolute best things. You don't have to wait for perfect conditions. Here's Kurt Cobain of Nirvana talking about exactly this kind of DIY, bottom-up pragmatism, and why it's actually the best.
We appreciate all different kinds of music, as long as it's good. Doesn't matter if it's on a major label, doesn't matter if it's a tape that someone made on their boombox or a recorder like this. Doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter even if someone hasn't even recorded something to even have it distributed to anyone. If it's good, it's good. We just like it. So, we should just play really cheap equipment, and a lot of times before a show we're scrambling for guitar parts and gluing things together just to have a guitar for that night. And we'd be just as happy playing in a basement. Sometimes it's the most appreciative time we have with music. It's just being together because we're good friends and we play music.
You don't need perfect stuff. You just need to do it and do it with whatever you have. Even if you're piecing together whatever guitar parts, whatever open source, whatever you've got. Many of Nirvana's songs only have 3 chords, but they became one of the most influential musical groups in history. Later, they did end up getting all that money, all the distribution, but when they started, it was just the purity of the music that got them there. You've got everything you need right now. I can't tell you how often it is that people waiting for perfect conditions is what actually prevents them from starting in the first place. If you are stuck there, you'll never get started. You don't need permission. Do it yourself. If you remember only one thing from this whole video, it's this: do it yourself. Humans have a visceral reaction to experiencing authenticity, even at the cost of perfection. Everyone is so focused on being perfect these days. And to that, I say, fuck perfection. Do it yourself, and if you do it that way, you might be able to create a movement that touches 1 billion people.
That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there.
Right.
You're just going to live it.
กล้องส่องได้ไหม
ได้
Prove it. Make your mark upon it. Once you learn that, you'll never be
ที่
the same
ที่
again.
ใส่ตังค์นี่เขาบอกใส่เต็มนี่จะได้100,000
โอ้
To think about what it would take
เรา
for
จะ
you
ใส่
to make
ถ้าใส่แบงค์พันได้100,000ถ้าใส่แบงค์500ได้50,000 ใส่คู่กันไงอันนี้
เอออ้าวไม่ใช่ไม่ได้เอาเก็บไว้ในตู้เซฟป่ะ
ก็เก็บไง
which
เออ
means you
แล้ว
don't
แล้ว
try
ก็
to
ใส่
create
ไหนจุ๊บหน่อย
perfection or wait for perfect conditions. That's one of the beginning conditions, I think, for starting a
นี่
true
เต็มนี่เราก็ได้100,000
It's crazy, it's
Anh
hard to
thấy
do, but if you
เอ
can
อ
get to
เอาไป
that
โฆษณา
second
ได้นะ
follower, then you can get 100,
เมื่อวานก็มีคนสั่ง
ขนาดเธอยังสั่งเลย แต่ว่า
and if you
เมื่อวานก็
do
มีคน
that,
สั่งอันนึง
leave a
เดี๋ยวจะไป
mark
ขาย
ไหน
แล้ว
ชอบไหม
ไหน
If
เดี๋
you
ยว
like this video, please
นี่
click
ทุกคน
subscribe
ใครอยากมีวินัย
and
การ
the
เก็บ
bell
เงิน
icon. We make
นี่
videos
ใส่
like this
เต็มนี่ได้
every
100,000
single week, and
และ
all
นี่เพิ่งได้
proceeds
นิด
from
เดียว
these videos go to the nonprofit.
นี่มีรหัสล็อกด้วยนะนี่
มีหักดอกด้วยเหรอใน
นี่
เนี้ย
นี่ไงมันประคองนี่ไงเจจะขโมยก็ไม่ได้นะเฮ้ยโจร
ไหนอะ
500นะนี่แล้วคล้องไงนี่
เออ
เออ ไม่ได้กินหรอกจ้ะใส่ตู้ตู้เซ
ไม่
ฟ
เอา
นี่
มีดแทงแล้ว
นี่
ก็
ไง
หั่นเรื่อยอ่ะ
นี่ไงรหัส
ถ้าคนจะเอาเขาก็หยิบไปทางอันนี้
ใส่ตู้เซฟอีกล็อกนึงเฮ้ยกว่าจะได้ก็เรามาพอดีเลย
เดี๋ยว
อย่านะ
ไหน
โดน500นะ
ทำไมต้อง500
ก็หยิบตลอด500เมื่อก่อน
5,000ไม่ได้เหรอ
ไม่ได้หรอกถ้าใส่แบงค์500ได้50,000ถ้าใส่แบงค์50อ่ะเท่าไหร่
อืม
ถ้าใส่แบงค์50มันก็ได้20,000ป่ะ25,000แล้ว
ไม่รู้เหมือนกันโอเค time to eat everyone I will wash my hand
If you look at why the Google founders are the Google founders and still have all this control over the company, you can look all the way back in time to at the moment of their earliest fundraisers, they were not desperate for cash and low leverage.
Hey, this is Michael Seigel with Dalton Caldwell, and welcome to Rookie Mistakes. We've asked YC founders for their rookie mistakes so we can share them with you and help you avoid them. Okay, so here's the next note that a YC founder wrote in. The easiest way to fundraise is to indeed have a good metric that is growing. When I ran a startup that wasn't growing, I spoke to 140 investors and only got 2 angel checks. Now I'm working on a startup that is growing, and almost every well-known VC is trying to figure out how to talk to us. It took us 1 week to raise our seed round.
I don't know, Michael. I've heard rumors from around the world that the best time to fundraise is before you have any metrics at all, right? Because once you have any revenue, you will be judged on the revenue.
In all, like 97% of the time, the demo, the product, the MVP with customers gives you so much more leverage when fundraising. 97% of the time.
When we talk about the fear-based decision
it makes a ton of rational sense to fundraise before the world figures it out. And before the world realizes, investors see that you launch it and no one actually wants the thing that you're making. You know that no one wants the thing you're making in your heart, right? And so rather than go and try to sell it and get what you're expecting to be really hard to sell, right? You know it's gonna be a hard sell, so hey, let's just raise before we go try to do it.
Not the best play. The other common failure path that we see is people putting the investor as the kind of center of this game, as opposed to the customer. People thinking the investor is almost the teacher, and their job through a pitch or through a deck is to get an A from the teacher, and the A is money.
I think that looking for validation from authority figures is a lot of how we are constructed to look at the world. And if you've been an employee or you've gone to school your whole lives, a lot of the way you get ahead in life is to figure out who the authority figure is that you need to please. And if you please that authority figure, it's the path to greatness. And so again, like if you're like a level 3 engineer in some big company and you're like, the way you get ahead is to impress the bosses, why not kind of pattern match that onto startups? Not true.
If I could redirect that energy towards pleasing people's customers.
Yeah, people call this customer obsession, like it's a buzzword. We're customer obsessed, but let's take that literally. What does it literally mean to be customer obsessed? What it literally means is most of your waking hours, who are you thinking about pleasing? It's your customers, and you're trying to solve problems for them.
I think this is a neat trick for an early stage founder. Audit the amount of time you spent last week talking to your customers, building product, right? If that amount of time in your waking day is like 80 to 90%, you're probably doing it right. If that amount of time in your waking hours in the last week is more like 20%, you're probably doing something very, very wrong. All right, so here's the next note that a YC founder wrote in. Raise what you need and nothing more. You will find a way to spend all of the money in your bank. Stay lean and get your fundamentals right. A lot of founders think money is like oxygen and you need it, but you need and nothing more. You will find a way to spend all of the money in your bank. Stay lean and get your fundamentals right. A lot of founders think money is like oxygen and you need it to survive. One of the things that Brian Chesky at Airbnb told the batch recently is maybe money's more like food. You definitely need food to survive, but in a lot of places in the world, including America, people are dying from too much food as opposed to too little food.
If you're afraid that bad things are going to happen, the idea of stockpiling as much of whatever resources you can as much as possible is totally sane and reasonable. The issue is really successful companies, the oxygen they have is revenue from their customers, and they're being pulled ahead by customer demand for their product, and that is providing the oxygen and growth is like the pull of customers.
It's funny because those companies tend to own more of their company when they IPO or exit. Those founders tend to be happier. They tend to have more innovation because if you don't have as much money, you gotta innovate. You've gotta do things better or different than your competitors.
The biggest difference between what founders own more of their companies than others is how desperate they ever were in the history of the company to need to raise money, and whether they were smart and had leverage when they fundraised. And so one crazy story that I don't think most people know is that Facebook was apparently always profitable. That even when it was a tiny college social network, they had these ads on the site way back in the day that made them profitable. And so there was never a round that Facebook was in trouble and raised on poor terms or raised more money than they needed. And so I believe at exit, this is kind of why Zuckerberg owns so much of the company. Same with Google. Google had incredible traction. This was a long time ago, but I used Google when it was Google.Stanford. It was a really popular search engine before they raised a single dollar because they built it when they were grad students and had tons of traction. And so the first money they raised was in very good terms, and every additional round they raised after that, they had incredible leverage. And so again, if you look at why the Google founders are the Google founders and still have all this control over the company, you can look all the way back in time to at the moment of their earliest fundraisers, they were not desperate for cash and low leverage.
I think that you just hit on this like secret hint to founders. Who you're comparing yourself to matters. Like if you're trying to hit a grand slam home run with your startup, compare yourself to the people who have hit grand slam home runs. Instead of comparing yourself with like a local peer group or the company that just raised at a unicorn valuation. Like
Other people in your pitch competition.
yeah, God, like at a minimum, if you're looking for like heroes to emulate, can you copy companies that have at least 100 million in revenue? And like preferably $1 billion. There's so much more you can learn. 100 million. In revenue. And like preferably $1 billion. There's so much more you can learn from their stories, even if they might be old. I guess, you know, Facebook's an old company now. But like, even if they might be older, man, like you can learn a lot more. And like that's what you're trying to emulate. You're not trying to emulate the unicorn valuation. You're trying to emulate the successful multi-billion revenue company.
Yeah, that's really well said, Michael. Choosing your peers and choosing who you want to be like is one of the most powerful things you can do if you're an ambitious person that wants to do things in the world. Is you get to choose who you want to be like.
Are you learning or are you earning? If both, you're in a great place. If it's one or the other, that's good too. If it's neither, it's time to move on. You're wasting your life. Learn or earn. And if you're smart, hardworking, capable, and want to learn more about being successful, and maybe even how to build a $1 billion startup, click subscribe and hit the bell icon right now. It's what we do every week right here. Let's get started. Learning is where you need to start. As early as possible and as quick as possible, it's important to become good at doing things. And that means either being a maker, which means design, product, and engineering, or being a hustler, management, sales, and marketing. The majority of people starting out in their careers really need to focus on learning first. My friend Steven Snofsky says, this is the protein before the carbs. Alright, you say, how do you actually start? Well, first is learning about yourself. What do you like? What do you enjoy? What allows you to enter a state of flow? And then second, once you know that, you need to acquire those skills. Once you know you love design, can you spend the 10,000 hours it takes to become truly great at it? Well, if you answer that first part, the second part comes easy because you won't even feel the 10,000 hours. You'll just love doing it. Okay, I got it. No, really, what do I do, you ask? Well, if you want to be a hustler, you gotta learn to market or sell. Marketing is about helping other people communicate their problem and how their solution is the best. If you see a product, website, or service that you like, and you have some improvements you can suggest, you gotta build it, or design it, or write it yourself, and then cold email them. Offer to do it, or just do it and send it to them. Sales, on the other hand, is about getting customers, so go get those customers without even asking. Send those customers to a founder, and they'll always take your email. They'll always remember you. It's a great way to break in. If you're a builder, on the other hand, well, you've got to build. There's power in being able to do that yourself and not rely on others. Find a problem to solve and then build a first version that solves that problem. When you're starting out, it sort of maybe doesn't even matter what that problem exactly is. A lot of people get hung up on this step. They wait for the exact perfect problem. It just has to be a real problem that your software can actually solve. It's no mistake that some of the best founders I've met started off by making gradebook software because they were still in school and they had access to teachers who were frustrated with their grade books. Many of them didn't stay in that education space. They ended up making billion-dollar companies in lots of other spaces, but they learned to create in gradebook software. It's a great lesson. Creating you can only learn by doing. So don't let the idea get in the way of you starting. Once you create something, anything, then iterate to make it work and turn it into
ส่วน
something
คนธร
really
รมดา
good.
กิน
When
เป็น
you
เงิน
create
นั้น
something
ราคา
impressive
แพ
that
ง
users
เป็น
love,
ค่ะ
it's better than a credential. It doesn't matter if you didn't go to Stanford. If you can point to a beautiful app or a website or a GitHub repo with elegant code that you created, you have done a thing that will almost always set you up to be a top 10% player off the bat with no credentials. When I was 14, that your software can actually solve. It's no mistake that some of the best founders I've met started off by making gradebook software because they were still in school and they had access to teachers who were frustrated with their grade books. Many of them didn't stay in that education space. They ended up making billion-dollar companies in lots of other spaces, but they learned to create in gradebook software. It's a great lesson. Creating you can only learn by doing. So don't let the idea get in the way of you starting. Once you create something, anything, then iterate to make it work and turn it into something really good. When you create something impressive that users love, it's better than a credential. It doesn't matter if you didn't go to Stanford. If you can point to a beautiful app or website or a GitHub repo with elegant code that you created, you have done a thing that will almost always set you up to be a top 10% player off the bat with no credentials. When I was 14, I got my first job cold calling the yellow pages in the internet section, and what I had was a website I could point to that had won design awards. It was for my junior high school underground newspaper. After that, I cold emailed my way to my first coding job. It worked for me, and it'll work for you. Here's Bill Gates talking exactly about this, what it takes to create and learn how to be great at those things.
If you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you'll be super good at it. I don't think that's quite as simple as that. What you do is you do about 50 hours, and 90% drop out because they don't like it or they're not good. You do another 50 hours and 90% drop out. So there's these constant cycles, and you do have to be lucky enough, but also fanatical enough to keep going. And so the person makes it to 10,000 hours is not just somebody who's done it for 10,000 hours. There's somebody who's chosen and been chosen in many different times.
Bill Gates is absolutely right here. It's the 10,000 hours where you choose to do the same thing over and over again until you become great at it. That is learning. Let's talk about earning. What do I mean by earning? Well, I mean putting money in your pocket. What do you actually take home? The best way to do it, I think, is still equity. To make the most amount of money, you need to create true wealth by owning the stock of a company that became worth a lot of money. And when you started it, you owned 100% of something that wasn't worth anything, but then you made it something. In my book, this is the highest form of earning because you made it. But of course, you can also earn cash. Facebook and Google pay engineers hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and stock. And at the high end, it's not unusual for execs to make tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. That's crazy, but remember that Google made over $166 billion in total revenue. If you divide that out by 135,000 employees, that's over $1.2 million per employee in revenue. That's an amazing way to earn, but sometimes there's a catch. What if you're not learning? I gotta say, this is my opinion and my opinion alone, but for me, I feel like I need to be learning something, otherwise I'm dying. I'd be pretty unhappy in a place where I didn't get to learn about new things or grow my skills and abilities. That being said, let's take a step back. Millions, if not billions of people on the planet make this trade-off every day, trading a portion of their happiness for financial stability. I'm not saying this is a bad situation. They can take care of themselves and their loved ones, and that's important. But if you really want to take steps to create things from nothing, you gotta be careful. You might end up in a cycle. Earn money to spend it to get a bigger house or car or nicer things. You'll spend more money over time, and before you know it, you're running on a hedonic treadmill. And the tricky thing about spending money to buy things that you don't want is they don't give you the satisfaction you really want. Here's philosopher Alan Watts talking about exactly that. Money never. Before you know it, you're running on a hedonic treadmill. And the tricky thing about over time, and before you know it, you're running on a hedonic treadmill. And the tricky thing about spending money to buy things that you don't want is they don't give you the satisfaction you really want. Here's philosopher Alan Watts talking about exactly that. Money never can buy pleasure, because all pleasures depend upon not putting down a symbol of power, money, but upon distance. In other words, now in Sausalito, where I live, we have pier after pier full of fine boats, motor cruisers, sailing boats, all sorts of things, which nobody ever uses. Because they've been bought on the falling for the ad line that if you buy this thing, you will have pleasure, you will have status, you will have something or other. And then they suddenly discover that having a boat requires the art of seamanship, which is difficult but rewarding. Therefore, nobody has time for it, and all they do with the boats is have cocktail parties on them at the weekend. If you know you want to create a startup, save the money. That boat or nice car or expensive clothes probably won't get you all the way to where you want to be. If you're young and still thrifty, don't change your lifestyle. That money you spend needs to be saved so that you can invest your time in creating your own startup or your own wealth engine. I have one other big warning for you. Sometimes these high-paying jobs that feel meaningless are bullshit jobs. Here's David Graeber. Intellectual of the Occupy Wall Street movement, talking about why some of these bullshit jobs exist.
So the Union used to say, well, you know, can we work and labor can pay us? They make up jobs that are completely unnecessary. That makes sense because they had an ideology of what worked. On the other hand, capitalism, that's exactly the thing that isn't supposed to happen. A private firm would never hire someone who would put out good money to someone who they don't actually need. But in fact, if you talk to people who work for large corporations, they do it all the time. How does that happen? I think that part of it has to be explained by political pressure. In a way, just as in the Soviet Union, there was a central directive saying we need full employment. They didn't say, therefore, make up bullshit jobs, right? But they didn't say don't do it.
Isn't that weird? Sometimes the more you get paid, the more meaningless the job actually becomes. You only get one life. It's too short to waste on things that you don't find fulfilling, even though they might make you comfortable. Yeah, you gotta remember, if you choose a job you love, you'll never have to work a day in your life. If you don't learn and you don't love it, you might have to leave once you earn enough to take the leap. Now let's talk about learning and earning. If it wasn't obvious already, it's the best. If you start a company or are early enough, you can learn while you
สวัสดีครับ
For founders, this
No.
is easy math. As a founder, when you start a company, you start off with 100% of the pie. The pie might be worth zero at that moment, but you're going to go make it worth something. If you do manage to get to product market fit, you can have a company that can exit in tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars. If you own 10 to 30% of that company by then, you could be a centimillionaire to billionaire. That's pretty crazy. For employees, you might have 25 basis points, 0.25% up to 2% or more. It can still be an outrageously good outcome, and you might not even have to take as big a risk. And being early means you might get less equity, but you're not starting at a point where the company is literally worth nothing. It can still be an amazing deal, especially if the company is growing very fast.
No, everyone.
When I was a Palantir, I was learning how to run teams, how to build product from scratch, but also earning equity in what ended up becoming a $4 billion company.
Này,
When
cái này
I worked
bạn.
at Y Combinator, I was learning to be an investor and learning how to work with startups at the earliest possible stage. But I was also earning some of the most valuable carry that exists in Silicon Valley as a part of that investment firm. And I'm learning and earning every day now as the founder and managing partner of my own venture capital firm. This is easy math. As a founder, when you start you might have to leave once you earn enough to take the leap. Now let's talk about learning and earning. If it wasn't obvious already, it's the best. If you start a company or are early enough, you can learn while you earn. For founders, this is easy math. As a founder, when you start a company, you start off with 100% of the pie. The pie might be worth zero at that moment, but you're going to go make it worth something. If you do manage to get to product market fit, you could have a company with an exit in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or billions of dollars. If you own 10 to 30% of that company by then, you could be a centimillionaire to billionaire. That's pretty crazy. For employees, you might have 25 basis points, 0.25%, up to 2% or more. It can still be an outrageously good outcome, and you might not even have to take as big a risk. And being early means you might get less equity, but you're not starting at a point where the company is literally worth nothing. It can still be an amazing deal, especially if the company is growing very fast. When I was at Palantir, I was learning how to run teams and how to build product from scratch, but also earning equity in what ended up becoming a $40 billion company. When I worked at Y Combinator, I was learning to be an investor and learning how to work with startups at the earliest possible stage. But I was also earning some of the most valuable carry that exists in Silicon Valley as a part of that investment firm. And I'm learning and earning every day now as the founder and managing partner of my own venture capital firm. I learn every day from founders that I get to meet and the problems that they run across. When it comes to YouTube, I'm doing this for fun. I donate the proceeds from this channel to nonprofits like Code 2040. So while I don't earn here, I do learn a ton from all of you. So keep the comments and DMs coming. Hearing what resonates for you and helps you is what helps me learn the most of all. Finally, there are places where you don't get to do learning or earning at all. You might be working at a non-tech company, a consulting firm, and you're getting no equity and a low pay. Or, what's worse, you might be working at a bad startup. And I'm really sorry if that's true for you. I remember working for a startup as an intern my junior year of college. I got the internship through the Stanford Career Fair, and I'd never worked at a bad startup before by then. It was an enterprise software startup that raised money but never seemed to close customers. The founder spent a lot of time on business trips, and I did a lot of work that summer creating marketing material, mock-ups and prototypes and screenshots to use in sales pitches. But they didn't close an entire sale my whole summer. I don't think they ever did. The startup died and I didn't earn much because interns don't get paid a lot, but I didn't learn very much either. It was basically a wash. I ate a lot of McDonald's and watched a lot of Hong Kong movies. This is sort of the secret truth of bad startups, and I hate to say it, but if you're... I did a lot of... and I firm, and you get learn the most of all. Finally, there are places where you don't get to do learning or earning at all. You might be working at a non-tech company, a consulting firm, and you're getting no equity and a low pay. Or, what's worse, you might be working at a bad startup. Really sorry if that's true for you. I remember working for a startup as an intern my junior year of college. I got the internship through the Stanford Career Fair, and I'd never worked at a bad startup before by then. It was an enterprise software startup that raised money but never seemed to close customers. The founder spent a lot of time on business trips, and I did a lot of work that summer creating marketing material, mock-ups and prototypes and screenshots to use in sales pitches. But they didn't close an entire sale my whole summer. I don't think they ever did. The startup died and I didn't earn much because interns don't get paid a lot, but I didn't learn very much either. It was basically a wash. I ate a lot of McDonald's and watched a lot of Hong Kong movies. This is sort of the secret truth of bad startups, and I hate to say it, but if you're in a situation like that, you should leave. If you're not learning, you don't have a way to earn equity or even a good salary, and especially if it's not fun or meaningful for you, you gotta quit. So, meaning, you don't have to say it, but if you're in a situation like that, you should leave. If you're not learning, you don't have a way to earn equity or even a good salary, and especially if it's not fun or meaningful for you, you gotta quit. So, what order do you do all of these things in? Here's what I recommend. Learn first, then earn. That's the best strategy. If you try and do it in reverse, you try to earn first, you'll probably still learn, but maybe slowly, and you don't know what you're going to give up. It might come at a great cost. And you also might get trapped in that hedonic treadmill. Always remember, if you're not learning or earning, You gotta plot your exit to a place where you can. Just to close it out, I like this snippet of Tim Cook talking about his journey from where he started to the CEO of Apple.
For me, the journey was not predictable at all. It goes sort of back to the Lincoln quote, is the only thing I believe you can do is prepare.
So that's it for this week. If you want to learn about other startup topics like what to do after you raise money or how to do design if you've never done it before, check out the latest videos on my channel where I dive into those topics and tons of other stuff. New videos here every single week. So don't miss them. Click subscribe and the bell icon right now. Turn on notifications for YouTube and you're going to get a little notification every time I post. Thanks for watching and I will see you next week. Co-founder are pitching on Sand Hill Road. We're sitting in the offices of Andreessen Horowitz, pitching Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. Thought it was going fine, just like the others. Ben turns to us and asks, "So, who's the CEO?" I looked at my co-founder's chin, he looked at me. He said both. And again, guess what? It was the wrong answer. The meeting might as well have ended at that moment. Let me walk you through this mistake so you don't have to make it yourself. And along the way, we'll talk about why we made that mistake. Picture this. It's 2010, and me and my co-founder are pitching on Sand Hill Road. We're sitting in the offices of Andreessen Horowitz, pitching Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz. Thought it was going fine, just like the others. Ben turns to us and asks, "So, who's the CEO?" I looked at my co-founder's chin, he looked at me. He said both. And again, guess what? It was the wrong answer. The meeting might as well have ended at that moment. Let me walk you through this mistake so you don't have to make it yourself. And along the way, we'll talk about why we made that mistake and what it means to be CEO. Are you ready? Let's get started. The most legendary duo that can and did pull off saying both to the co-CEO question is Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the founders of Google. You could say that we thought we could be just like that dynamic duo. What was good enough for Google surely could be good enough for us, right? Whoa. No, look, we had a good hockey stick graph. We had software we had built that we were proud of. Look, most people are not Google at their Series A. I know we weren't. The funnier thing about this whole thing is that Ben Horowitz actually wrote a long-form article about this in 2013. He said, "Shared command always seems really attractive to the people at the top of the organization, like the CEO and the board. We have two world-class people. This gives us the best of both worlds. We shouldn't get caught up in the conventions of years past. We're all adults. We can get along." It looks much less attractive to those who do all the work in the organization. To them, it looks like frustration, chaos, and delay. That's the real reason why co-CEO doesn't work. It's bad for founders and bad for everyone else. Everything takes longer. Say you have a hard decision to make. You have two co-CEOs. You have to wait for the co-CEOs to agree. That makes every decision you have to make much longer. It becomes life or death at that point. You slow down so much that your startup will die. Back to sitting in that Andreessen Horowitz conference room. It was 2010. How did I find myself in this position? We didn't know who the CEO was yet, and yet we were here talking to venture capitalists about raising millions of dollars. Look, I didn't think being CEO mattered. And later I discussed it with my co-founder after our Series A, and he became the CEO. talking about who's CEO or when you're trying to divide the pie, there are moments when you and your co-founders are aligned, and there are moments when you aren't. Moments where you have to divide the pie are the latter, and the best you can do is make sure that you self-advocate. Try to think through what you need. I'm actually glad I worked on Posterous.
Okay, bye bye everyone. Bye bye.